My name is James, a 28-year-old software engineer who built a life, despite my father always favoring my sister Amanda. I never expected a routine family dinner would be where everything finally shattered. For years I'd been secretly supporting my sister financially while enduring my father's constant criticism. That night when Dad exploded with those familiar words of disappointment, something inside me finally broke free. Before I dive into what happened next and how it changed, everything drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to catch more stories about standing up for yourself when it matters most. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts. Our house was nothing special, just a modest, 3-bedroom colonial with fading blue paint and a small yard where neighborhood kids would gather for impromptu football games. My father, Robert, worked as a sales manager for a manufacturing company, a job he complained about daily but never left. My mother, Catherine, was a kindergarten teacher who genuinely loved her work, but often seemed drained of energy at home. From my earliest memories, our family had a clear hierarchy. Dad made the decisions, Mom tried to keep the peace, Amanda was the star, and I was, well, just there. Amanda came along 3 years after me, and from the moment she arrived, the dynamic was set. She had these big blue eyes and blonde curls that made everyone fawn over her. I was the quiet kid with brown hair who preferred books to baseball. The signs of favoritism were subtle at first. When I brought home straight, as Dad would nod and say, "That's what you're supposed to do." When Amanda brought home B's and C's, there would be celebratory ice cream because she tried so hard. When I won the school spelling bee in 4th grade, Mom put the certificate on the fridge. Dad never mentioned it. When Amanda participated in her first dance recital that same year, Dad talked about her natural talent for weeks, even though she tripped twice during her routine. The root of this imbalance became clear as I got older. Dad had been a star quarterback in college, with dreams of going pro until a knee injury ended those plans. He'd always wanted a son who would follow in his athletic footsteps, someone he could coach and live vicariously through. Instead, he got me a kid who was more interested in taking apart our old computer than throwing a football. Mom would try to balance things in her quiet way. She'd slip into my room after Dad criticized my lack of interest in sports and tell me she was proud of my amazing brain. She'd help me with science projects and encourage my interest in computers, but she never stood up to Dad directly. Their relationship had its own power imbalance, with Mom always yielding to Dad's stronger personality. The pattern of unequal treatment manifested in specific incidents that remain burned into my memory. When my 10th birthday fell on the same weekend as Amanda's dance recital, my party was canceled so the family could attend her performance. "We'll celebrate next weekend," Mom promised, but Dad added, "James understands that Amanda needs our support." I did understand. I understood that my sister's activities would always take priority. In 8th grade, I won first place in the regional science fair with a computer program I'd written that simulated ecosystem changes. The blue ribbon sat on our kitchen counter for 2 days without comment from Dad. That same month, Amanda received a participation trophy for her soccer team, which finished last in their league. Dad hung the trophy on our mantle and bought her a new pair of cleats to encourage her athletic development. The most telling example came during our senior years of high school. I was accepted to MIT with a partial scholarship, an achievement that represented countless hours of hard work and determination. When I showed Dad the acceptance letter, he glanced at it and said, "That's going to be expensive." When Amanda got accepted to the state university with no scholarship, Dad took the family out for a fancy dinner and gave a toast to our family's first college student as if I hadn't already been accepted months earlier. As these experiences accumulated, I developed a complicated mixture of resentment and determination. Each dismissal of my achievements and each exaggerated celebration of Amanda's mediocrity fueled my drive to succeed, despite my father's lack of support. I stopped seeking his approval and instead focused on proving something to myself. I coped by diving deeper into my interests. Our high school had a computer lab with outdated equipment, but the technology teacher, Mr. Reeves, recognized my abilities and gave me access to the lab during lunch and after school. He became the mentor I couldn't find at home, encouraging my coding projects and connecting me with summer internship opportunities. I found other supportive adults too. My math teacher, Mrs. Fernandez, who lent me advanced textbooks, and our neighbor, Mr. Wilson, who worked as a software developer and answered my endless questions about the industry. By the time I graduated high school, I had created a small network of mentors and supporters outside my family. These relationships helped me develop confidence in my abilities despite the constant undermining at home. I learned to find validation from within, rather than seeking it from my father, though the emotional scar tissue from years of unequal treatment remained. Amanda, meanwhile, grew accustomed to praise without achievement. She expected recognition for minimal effort and developed a sense of entitlement that would eventually become problematic as she entered adulthood. In many ways, Dad's favoritism hurt both of us, just in different ways. I was denied the parental support I deserved, while Amanda was denied the opportunity to develop resilience and self-sufficiency. As high school ended and college loomed, I made a private promise to myself. I would build a life so successful that even my father couldn't dismiss it. Not for his approval anymore, but for my own vindication. Little did I know that this determination would lead to financial success and eventually place me in a position of power I never anticipated. My college years at MIT marked the beginning of my true independence. I visited home only during major holidays, and even those brief trips were tense affairs filled with awkward silences and thinly veiled criticisms from Dad. Our phone calls became increasingly infrequent, usually initiated by Mom, with Dad occasionally taking the phone to ask perfunctory questions about my studies before handing it back. This distance was painful but necessary. Away from the shadow of my father's disappointment, I flourished. The campus was filled with people like me, curious minds who valued intelligence and innovation. For the first time, my abilities were not just acknowledged but celebrated. I formed friendships with classmates who understood my passion for technology, and several professors took me under their wing, recognizing potential that had gone largely unnoticed at home. During my sophomore year, I secured an internship at Apex Technologies, a prestigious firm known for its cutting-edge software development. The application process was brutally competitive, with hundreds of students vying for just 5 positions. When I received the acceptance email, I called home excited to share the news. Mom answered and expressed genuine pride, but when Dad got on the line, he simply asked, "Does it pay well?" When I explained that the experience and connections were more valuable than the modest stipend, he grunted and changed the subject to Amanda's new boyfriend. I worked 80-hour weeks that summer, absorbing everything I could about professional software development. My supervisor, Marcus, became another important mentor, teaching me not just technical skills but also how to navigate corporate culture and communicate my ideas effectively. At the end of the internship, he offered me a standing invitation to return after graduation, an exceptional vote of confidence that I treasured. I graduated with honors, earning my degree in computer science with a specialization in artificial intelligence. The commencement ceremony was on a perfect May day, the campus alive with excitement and possibility. Mom attended, dabbing tears throughout the ceremony. Dad came too, though he spent much of the event checking his phone and asking when we could leave for the airport. When I crossed the stage, I heard Mom's enthusiastic applause but couldn't pick out Dad's contribution among the crowd. Rather than accepting the position at Apex, I took a risk and joined a small startup called NeuralSync. The salary was lower than other offers, but the company was developing an innovative machine learning platform that aligned perfectly with my interests. The first year was grueling: long hours, tight deadlines, and the constant uncertainty that comes with startup culture. I shared a cramped apartment with 2 roommates to keep expenses low and poured everything into my work. My breakthrough came during my second year at NeuralSync. We were struggling with an algorithm that kept producing inconsistent results, threatening a major contract. After weeks of frustration, I had an insight while riding the subway home one night. I spent the entire weekend coding, fueled by coffee and determination, and emerged with a solution that not only fixed the immediate problem, but significantly improved the entire platform's performance. This innovation caught the attention of our industry. I was invited to present at conferences, interviewed for technical publications, and approached by recruiters from major tech companies. At 25, I was promoted to senior engineer, with a substantial salary increase and equity in the company. Neuralsync's value tripled over the next 2 years, making my stock options worth more than I had ever imagined possible. Financial success came faster than I expected. I made prudent investments, lived below my means, and watched my savings grow. At 27, I purchased my first home, a modern 2-bedroom condo, in a desirable neighborhood with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city skyline. It represented everything I had worked for: independence, security, and validation of my chosen path. Meanwhile, Amanda's life was following a very different trajectory. She had started college at the state university, with Dad covering her tuition, but dropped out after 3 semesters, claiming the academic environment wasn't nurturing her creativity. She moved back home and worked a series of retail jobs, never staying at any position longer than a few months. Dad always defended her choices, saying she was finding her path and too special to be stuck in a mundane job. A year later, Amanda enrolled in a private art school, convinced she had discovered her calling as a photographer. Dad paid the expensive tuition without question, despite his earlier concerns about the cost of my partially scholarshiped MIT education. After 2 semesters, she dropped out again, this time because the instructors were too critical and didn't understand her vision. Her personal life followed a similar pattern of instability. She cycled through relationships quickly, each new boyfriend initially described as the one before inevitably becoming toxic or unsupportive within months. Several of these relationships ended with Amanda needing financial help to cover shared expenses her ex-partners had left behind. As Amanda approached her mid-20s, her financial dependence on our parents intensified. She moved into her own apartment, but Dad paid her rent. She had a car, but Mom covered the insurance. She had a credit card for emergencies, which somehow included new clothes and restaurant meals. I learned about most of this through occasional calls with Mom, who began expressing quiet concern about their retirement savings. During one such call, Mom hesitantly mentioned that Amanda needed money for rent, but they were temporarily short because of Dad's medical bills from a minor surgery. Without hesitation, I offered to help, sending enough to cover Amanda's rent for 2 months. I made Mom promise not to tell Amanda or Dad that the money came from me. It wasn't about recognition. I just couldn't bear the thought of my parents draining their savings while I had more than enough. This began a pattern that would continue for the next 3 years. Mom would occasionally mention financial struggles, and I would send money through her, always anonymously. Part of me felt proud that I could help my family, but another part recognized the unhealthy dynamic this created. I was enabling Amanda's continued dependence and protecting Dad from facing the consequences of his favoritism. Yet each time Mom called with that particular tone of stress in her voice, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. Despite my financial success and professional recognition, I still carried a complicated desire for my father's approval. Logical or not, that need remained buried in my psyche, occasionally surfacing during late-night reflections or after difficult phone calls home. I had built a life that disproved his low expectations of me, yet his validation remained the one achievement that eluded me. As my career continued to advance, Amanda's financial situation deteriorated further. What began as occasional assistance with rent evolved into a regular monthly commitment that expanded to include utilities, car payments, and even credit card bills. Mom became the reluctant intermediary, passing my money to Amanda, while maintaining the fiction that it came from their retirement savings. During one particularly candid phone conversation, Mom confessed that they had already withdrawn more than $60,000 from their retirement accounts to support Amanda. "We didn't want to worry you," she said, her voice tight with stress, "but your father's company is downsizing, and we're concerned about his position." The implications were clear. My parents were sacrificing their financial security for Amanda's lifestyle while facing potential income loss themselves. I increased my monthly transfers, telling myself it was temporary, just until Amanda found stable employment or Dad's job situation stabilized. But a troubling pattern emerged as I observed Amanda's behavior through social media and Mom's reluctant updates. The first incident that raised serious red flags occurred after Amanda called Mom in tears, claiming her car needed emergency transmission repairs, costing $2,500. I sent the money, immediately worried about her safety with an unreliable vehicle. 3 days later, she posted photos from a weekend trip to Miami with friends, tagging herself at expensive restaurants and beachfront clubs. When Mom gently questioned the timing of the vacation, Amanda claimed it had been prepaid months ago, and she needed the stress relief after dealing with car problems. A month later, Amanda reported substantial medical bills from an emergency room visit for what turned out to be a panic attack. I covered the $3,000 without question. Healthcare emergencies weren't something to scrutinize. 2 weeks later, she showed off a new designer handbag and expensive hair extensions on Instagram. When I casually mentioned these purchases to Mom, suggesting that perhaps Amanda could manage some of her own expenses, Mom became defensive, saying, "Your sister has always had anxiety issues. She needs certain comforts to feel secure." The third and most troubling incident involved Amanda claiming to need help with security deposits and first month's rent for a new apartment, her third move in 2 years. The total came to $3,500, which I transferred to Mom's account. Later that week, during a rare phone conversation with Amanda herself, she mentioned being between opportunities but interviewing like crazy. I offered to connect her with recruiters I knew in several industries, explaining that my network might help her find something stable. "That's sweet of you, James," she replied with a laugh, "but I'm looking for something fulfilling, not just a paycheck. I can't settle for a boring office job like you did." When I pressed for details about her recent interviews, she became vague, eventually admitting there hadn't been any actual interviews, just applications she'd submitted online. Further conversation revealed she'd turned down 2 legitimate job offers because the positions weren't senior enough despite her limited work experience. Meanwhile, during family phone calls, Dad continued to praise Amanda's free spirit and criticize my focus on career advancement. "Not everything is about money and success, James," he said during one particularly frustrating conversation. "Amanda understands the importance of experiencing life and finding personal fulfillment. You've always been too focused on proving yourself instead of living." The irony of this statement, given that my money was funding Amanda's experiences, was almost too much to bear. The strain began affecting my mental health. I developed insomnia, often lying awake, wondering if I was enabling destructive patterns or genuinely helping my family through a difficult time. After a particularly brutal week of work, stress compounded by another urgent financial request from home, I finally made an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Elizabeth Chen was in her 50s, with a calm demeanor and direct approach that cut through my tendency to rationalize the situation. During our third session, after I'd explained the full history of my family dynamics, she leaned forward and asked simply, "What would happen if you stopped paying Amanda's bills?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I had never seriously considered that option, assuming it would lead to Amanda becoming homeless or my parents depleting their retirement entirely. When I expressed these fears, Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "It sounds like you've been assigned the role of family rescuer without your consent," she said. "You're carrying financial responsibility without any authority or recognition. That's an unsustainable position that's causing you significant distress." Over the next several months of therapy, I began to understand the complex web of family dynamics that had trapped us all. I wasn't just giving money, I was participating in a system that kept Amanda dependent, my parents in denial, and myself perpetually seeking validation I would never receive. Dr. Chen helped me explore healthier boundaries and recognize my own worth apart from either financial contribution or parental approval. I attempted several times to discuss the situation rationally with my father. During one visit home, I carefully broached the subject of Amanda's financial dependence, suggesting that helping her develop job skills might be more beneficial long-term than covering her expenses. Dad shut down the conversation immediately. "You've always been jealous of the special bond Amanda and I have," he said dismissively. "She's going through a temporary rough patch. Not everyone can be a robotic success machine like you, James. Some people need time and support to find their way." His words stung, but thanks to my work with Dr. Chen, I was better equipped to recognize the manipulation. I understood that Dad's characterization of me as robotic and Amanda as special was part of a narrative he'd constructed to justify the unequal treatment that had defined our family for decades. As my therapy progressed, I began to consider establishing firmer boundaries around my financial support. I wasn't ready to cut off assistance entirely concerned about the impact on my parents' retirement security, but I recognized that the current arrangement wasn't helping anyone in the long run. I decided that the next time the family gathered, I would have an honest conversation about creating a sustainable plan for Amanda's future, one that involved developing independence rather than perpetuating dependence. I had no idea that the opportunity would come sooner than expected, or that it would unfold in a way I could never have anticipated. The occasion for our rare family gathering was Dad's 60th birthday. Mom suggested meeting at Salvatore's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown that Dad had always wanted to try but considered too expensive for regular outings. I made the reservation and privately arranged to cover the bill my small gift to the man who had never truly seen my worth. I arrived early professionally, dressed in a tailored navy suit after coming directly from a client meeting. The restaurant exuded old-world elegance, with its dark wood paneling, crisp white tablecloths, and soft lighting from ornate chandeliers. The maitre d' led me to a corner table partially secluded by a decorative screen, offering a perfect balance of privacy and ambiance. Mom and Dad arrived next. Dad looked older than his 60 years, his once robust frame, slightly stooped hair, completely gray. Mom had maintained her gentle warmth, though new worry lines creased her forehead as she hugged me. Amanda arrived 20 minutes late, offering no apology, as she air-kissed each of us and immediately ordered an expensive cocktail before even sitting down. The evening began pleasantly enough. We ordered appetizers to share calamari bruschetta and an antipasto platter. Dad reminisced about his college football days, telling stories I'd heard countless times but feigned interest in for the sake of harmony. Mom asked about my work, and I gave a simplified explanation of my current project developing security algorithms for financial institutions. Amanda scrolled through her phone intermittently, occasionally showing Mom photos of a friend's new puppy or a cafe she'd discovered. The tension remained beneath the surface like a fault line waiting for pressure to build. It finally emerged as our main courses arrived: Dad's osso buco, Mom's linguine with clams, Amanda's lobster ravioli, and my chicken parmesan. Amanda set down her fork after 2 bites and cleared her throat dramatically. "So I have some exciting news," she announced, drawing all attention to herself. "I found the perfect apartment in the West Side Arts District. It's in this converted warehouse with exposed brick and these amazing windows. All the up-and-coming artists live in the building." "That sounds lovely, dear," Mom said carefully. "But isn't the West Side quite expensive?" Amanda waved away the concern. "It's an investment in my career network. I've been talking with this gallery owner who might exhibit some of my photography, and he says location is everything in the arts community." Dad beamed with pride. "That's my girl, always thinking strategically. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money." I took a slow sip of water, remembering that Amanda hadn't picked up a camera in months, according to Mom's updates. Her photography career consisted of smartphone pictures posted to Instagram with heavy filters. "What's the rent like?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Amanda shifted in her seat. "It's actually really reasonable for the area, only $2,400 a month. And I'd need to put down first and last month's rent plus security deposit, so around $7,200 to move in." She directed this information to Dad, avoiding my gaze. Mom paled visibly. I knew from our conversations that their retirement account was dangerously depleted, and Dad's company had indeed announced layoffs starting next quarter. Dad looked thoughtful for a moment before turning to me. "James, you've been doing well for yourself. $2,400 wouldn't make a dent in your monthly income." There it was not a direct request, but the clear implication that I should volunteer to fund Amanda's latest whim. In previous years, I would have arranged it privately through Mom to avoid confrontation, but months of therapy had strengthened my resolve to break unhealthy patterns. "Amanda's rent isn't my responsibility," I said calmly. "I think we should discuss how she plans to afford this apartment with her current income." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Amanda stared at her plate while Dad's expression darkened. Mom attempted to redirect the conversation. "The calamari was excellent, wasn't it? We should ask for the recipe. Your sister is trying to build something meaningful." Dad interrupted, his voice carrying the edge that had intimidated me throughout childhood. "Not everyone measures success by their bank account, James." "I don't measure success by money," I replied evenly. "I measure it by independence and self-sufficiency, values I had to learn on my own." Amanda looked up, her eyes narrowing. That's such a passive-aggressive thing to say. Not everyone had the advantages you did. The irony of this statement was staggering. I had worked through college, secured scholarships, and built my career through persistent effort, while Amanda had received continuous financial support despite minimal effort. What advantages are you referring to exactly? I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. You were always the smart one, she said, as though intelligence had been gifted to me rather than developed through countless hours of study and practice. Everything came easily to you. Dad nodded in agreement. James, you need to understand that your sister has a creative soul. She needs freedom to explore her potential, not be tied down by mundane concerns. And who should be tied down by those mundane concerns instead? I asked. That's just life, son, Dad said dismissively. Family helps family. Your mother and I supported you through college. I had scholarships I corrected. And I worked 20 hours a week at the campus IT department. There you go again, always keeping score. Dad's voice rose slightly. Always the calculator, never the heart. Several diners at nearby tables glanced our way. Mom placed a hand on Dad's arm, silently urging him to lower his voice. I'm not keeping score, I said. I'm stating facts. And the fact is that Amanda has received significantly more financial support than I ever did, with significantly less expectation of eventual independence. Amanda's face flushed with anger. You think you're so perfect, don't you? Sitting there in your expensive suit judging my life choices. I don't judge your choices, I replied. I question why they should be funded by others. Dad's patience finally snapped. He slammed his palm on the table, causing silverware to rattle and water to slosh from glasses. The restaurant fell momentarily silent as dozens of eyes turned toward our table. You've always been like this, he said, voice raised, despite the public setting. Cold, calculating, selfish. Your sister has heart, creativity, passion, things you know nothing about. She's better than you in every way that matters. The words hung in the air, their familiarity almost comforting in their predictability. I had heard variations of this speech throughout my life, yet this time was different. I felt no pain, no desperate need to prove him wrong. Instead, I experienced a strange clarity, as though viewing our family dynamic from a great height. I leaned back in my chair, a small smile forming on my lips. The calm that washed over me wasn't forced. It was the genuine peace of someone finally ready to speak their truth. Good, I said quietly, my voice carrying in the hushed restaurant. Then I'm done paying her rent. The silence that followed was absolute. Amanda froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Mom's eyes widened in shock. Dad's expression shifted from anger to confusion. What are you talking about? He finally asked. I've been paying Amanda's rent for the past 3 years, I explained, my voice steady. Along with her utilities, car payment, insurance, and various emergency expenses, all channeled through Mom to maintain the illusion that you two were covering everything. Dad turned to Mom, who nodded, almost imperceptibly, tears forming in her eyes. He's been helping us, Mom whispered. We were draining our retirement so fast, James offered. Why wasn't I told about this? Dad demanded. Because you wouldn't have accepted it, I answered for Mom. Your pride wouldn't allow you to acknowledge that the son you've always dismissed has been keeping your favorite afloat. Amanda found her voice panic, replacing her earlier confidence. This isn't funny, James. If you've been helping, I'm grateful, but cutting me off without warning is cruel. No, I said, looking directly at her. What's cruel is watching you squander your potential while Dad reinforces the idea that you're too special for ordinary responsibility. What's cruel is seeing Mom stressed about retirement while transferring my money to your account every month. What's cruel is maintaining this dysfunction for years because addressing it honestly might hurt feelings. Dad seemed to physically deflate before my eyes, the realization of his daughter's true financial situation and his son's quiet support finally sinking in. How much, he asked hoarsely. How much have you been sending? On average, about $4,500 a month for the past 3 years, I said. Occasionally more for special circumstances or emergencies. Dad did the mental calculation, his expression shifting as he grasped the total sum, well over $150,000. Amanda began to cry, mascara tracking down her cheeks. You can't just stop. What am I supposed to do? The same thing most adults do, I replied gently. finding no satisfaction in her distress, despite the vindication I felt. Find sustainable work, live within your means, and build your own security. I signaled for the check, signed the credit card slip, and stood to leave. I think we all need time to process this. I'm going to head home now. Mom, Dad, happy birthday. The dinner's been paid for. As I walked out of the restaurant, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier, freed from a burden I'd carried silently for years, yet weighted by the knowledge that our family would never be the same. The drive home from the restaurant was surreal. Boston's nighttime skyline glittered against the dark sky as I navigated familiar streets that somehow looked different. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white despite the profound calm I'd projected at dinner. Once inside my condo, I sank onto my couch in the dark, still wearing my suit, and finally allowed the emotions to surface. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel, perhaps triumph or righteous satisfaction. Instead, a complex mixture of relief, grief, guilt, and uncertainty washed over me in waves. I had finally spoken my truth after years of silent resentment, but the cost remained unknown. Had I irreparably damaged my already fragile family relationships? Should I have found a gentler way to establish boundaries? My phone began vibrating incessantly, within minutes of arriving home. Amanda sent a barrage of text messages that evolved from angry accusations to tearful pleas. "How could you humiliate me like that? You're so cruel. You've always been jealous of me and Dad's relationship. Please don't do this. I'll lose my apartment. I promise I'll start looking for a better job tomorrow. At least give me a few months to figure things out." I silenced notifications from her number, knowing I needed emotional distance to maintain my resolve. Dad called 3 times in succession, leaving increasingly agitated voicemails demanding that I fix this mess and stop punishing your sister for my words. His final message ended with a grudging, "We should talk about this like adults. Call me back." Mom's approach was different. A single text that read, "I understand why you did this. I'm sorry I put you in this position for so long. We'll figure it out. I love you." Her message brought tears to my eyes, the simple acknowledgement of my perspective more meaningful than she could know. The next morning I called in to work, requesting a personal day for the first time in years. My boss, concerned by this unprecedented occurrence, asked if everything was all right. "Family matters," I explained vaguely. "Nothing I can't handle, but I need today to sort things out." The understanding in her voice reminded me that healthy relationships, even professional ones, included space for human struggles. By mid-morning, Amanda had escalated her communication strategy, alternating between threats and bargaining. "I'll tell everyone in the family how you abandoned me. What if I look for a cheaper apartment instead? Maybe I could pay you back eventually. Just 3 more months of support, then I'll be completely independent." I maintained my silence, recognizing these as manipulation tactics, rather than genuine efforts to understand my position or take responsibility. Dad's approach evolved more slowly. His initial anger gave way to blame. This is what happens when you put money above family, before shifting to reluctant acknowledgement of the situation's complexity. "I didn't realize how much financial pressure your mother was under." Still, he avoided addressing the core issues of favoritism and Amanda's dependence, focusing instead on practical solutions that would allow the previous dynamic to continue in modified form. 3 days after the restaurant confrontation, Mom called. Her voice sounded tired, but somehow stronger than it had in years. "I need to apologize properly," she began, "not just for asking you to help financially, but for not standing up for you all these years. I thought I was protecting everyone by keeping the peace, but I was actually helping maintain an unhealthy situation." "You were caught in the middle," I said, throat tight with emotion. "I understand that wasn't easy." "It wasn't, but that doesn't excuse it." She paused, then continued with new determination. "Your father and I had a long talk last night, probably our first truly honest conversation in decades. He's struggling to accept his role in creating this situation, but he's trying, James. And Amanda, well, she's angry and frightened, but this reckoning was inevitable." "How are you handling the practical aspects?" I asked, concerned about their retirement security despite my resolve to end the financial enabling. "We've told Amanda she can move back home temporarily if she loses her apartment, but she'll need to contribute to expenses and actively pursue employment," Mom explained. "I've also made an appointment with a financial advisor to assess our retirement situation realistically. We may need to downsize earlier than planned, but we'll manage." The conversation with Mom reassured me that, while painful, my actions at the restaurant had initiated necessary changes. Still, the emotional toll was significant. I returned to Dr. Chen's office for an emergency session, needing guidance to process the aftermath and maintain my boundaries despite intense pressure. "What you're experiencing is the discomfort of disrupting a long-established family system," she explained after I recounted the dinner and its aftermath. "Everyone had defined roles: you as the provider, Amanda, as the dependent, your father, as the protector of Amanda, and your mother as the mediator. You've changed the script, and that creates anxiety for everyone, including you." "Part of me wants to give in," I admitted. "Write one more check to ease the transition." Dr. Chen nodded understanding. "That's natural. But ask yourself whether another check would truly help Amanda develop independence, or just delay the inevitable while reinforcing old patterns." That session strengthened my resolve to maintain boundaries while still offering appropriate support. I drafted an email to Amanda outlining what I was and wasn't willing to provide: no more direct financial assistance, but I would pay for career counseling, resume services, and professional development courses if she was interested. I emphasized that my boundary wasn't about punishment, but about believing in her capacity to support herself. Amanda's reply came a day later, shorter than her previous messages, and noticeably lacking in emotional manipulation. "I'm still angry, but I'll think about the career counseling. I have a job interview at a gallery next week. Don't tell Dad." This small step toward responsibility gave me cautious hope, though I recognized the road ahead would be long and likely include setbacks. A week after the dinner, Dad finally called with a different tone. His voice lacked its usual authoritative confidence as he suggested meeting for coffee. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. The man who greeted me looked older and more uncertain than the father who had dominated my childhood. He ordered black coffee and sat across from me, hands fidgeting with a napkin. "Your mother helped me understand some things," he began awkwardly, "about how you've been supporting Amanda all this time." I nodded but remained silent, allowing him space to continue. "I still don't agree with how you handled it at the restaurant," he said, a flash of the old defensiveness returning. "But I should have been more aware of the financial realities, and I should have pushed Amanda toward independence sooner." It wasn't a full acknowledgement of the deeper issues between us, but it was more self-reflection than I'd ever heard from him. We spoke for over an hour, not resolving decades of complicated feelings, but at least beginning an honest dialogue. As we prepared to leave, Dad hesitated, then asked, "Would you be willing to join us for dinner again sometime? At the house, not a restaurant. Your mother misses having you around." "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity of my response. In the following weeks, I maintained my boundaries while processing a spectrum of emotions through continued therapy sessions. The guilt diminished as I recognized that my actions, while difficult, were ultimately more respectful of Amanda's capabilities than continuing to enable her dependence. The grief remained, mourning the family dynamic I had wished for rather than the one I had, but it became less acute with time and honest communication. I arranged a meeting with a financial advisor for my parents, offering to attend as support, but making it clear I wouldn't be contributing financially to their retirement beyond what I could give as occasional gifts within normal family boundaries. The advisor helped them develop a realistic plan that would require lifestyle adjustments, but could ensure their long-term security. Amanda's journey proved more tumultuous. She did attend the gallery interview, but wasn't offered the position. Her initial response was to blame the interviewer's obvious bias against women in the arts. But after several more rejections, she reluctantly accepted a retail position at a home decor store. When she couldn't afford her apartment's rent without my assistance, She moved back to our parents' home, an arrangement that created tension but also forced necessary conversations about expectations and contributions. Through these difficult weeks, I discovered that establishing boundaries, while painful, created space for authentic relationships to potentially develop. We were all learning to interact as adults, rather than remaining trapped in childhood roles that no longer served any of us. The process was messy and incomplete, but for the first time it felt honest. 2 months after the restaurant confrontation, I invited my family to my condo for dinner. The invitation represented more than a meal. It was an opportunity to meet on my territory in the home I had built through my own efforts. It also served as neutral ground away from the childhood home where old roles and patterns seemed etched into the very walls. I spent the day preparing not just cleaning and cooking, but also mentally reviewing strategies from therapy for maintaining healthy boundaries while remaining open to genuine connection. I prepared my favorite recipes: grilled salmon with dill sauce, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread from a local bakery, wanting to share something authentic rather than trying to impress. They arrived together, each carrying something despite my assurance that they didn't need to bring anything. Mom held a bouquet of mixed flowers. Dad awkwardly clutched a bottle of wine he'd clearly put thought into selecting, and Amanda brought a small potted succulent with a handwritten note that read simply, "Thanks for having me." The initial minutes were tense, filled with overly polite small talk and careful movements, as though we were all navigating a space filled with invisible tripwires. We sat in my living room with glasses of wine, the city skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, physical distance between us on the sectional sofa. After 20 minutes of strained conversation about traffic and weather, I decided to address the elephant in the room directly. I had prepared a statement with Dr. Chen's guidance, something truthful without being accusatory. I wanted to have you all here tonight because despite everything that's happened, you're my family. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. The dinner 2 months ago brought a lot of long-standing issues to the surface, which was painful but necessary. I'm not interested in assigning blame or rehashing arguments. What I want is to establish a new way of relating to each other based on mutual respect and honest communication. I outlined what that meant from my perspective: no more financial enabling recognition of each person's autonomy and choices, and acknowledgement of our shared history without being defined by it. I explained that while I was open to rebuilding our relationships, I would maintain firm boundaries around my time, money, and emotional energy. Dad shifted uncomfortably throughout my speech, clearly unaccustomed to such direct communication about family dynamics. When I finished, the silence stretched until he finally cleared his throat. "I've never been good at this kind of talk," he admitted, staring at his hands. "But I've been thinking a lot about things since that night." He looked up, meeting my eyes with visible effort. "I had certain expectations for you that weren't fair. When you didn't meet them, when you weren't interested in sports or following my path, I took it personally instead of seeing who you actually were. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of the years of favoritism, but it was more insight than I'd ever heard from him." I nodded, accepting his partial understanding as a beginning rather than demanding perfection. Mom spoke next, her voice quiet but firm. "I enabled a lot of unhealthy patterns in our family by trying to keep everyone happy instead of addressing problems directly. I'm working on finding my voice now, even when it creates temporary discomfort." Amanda remained silent, longest examining her wine glass as though it contained answers. When she finally spoke, her words surprised me. "I'm angry about a lot of things right now," she said bluntly. "Angry that my safety net disappeared. Angry that I wasn't better prepared for adult responsibilities. Angry at myself for expecting others to solve my problems." She set down her glass with deliberate care. "But I'm also starting to understand that the way things were wasn't actually helping me become the person I want to be." We moved to the dining table, the conversation flowing more naturally as we served food and shifted to less emotionally charged topics. Dad asked genuinely interested questions about my current work project. Mom shared her excitement about a watercolor class she'd started taking. Amanda mentioned her job at the home decor store, acknowledging it wasn't her dream position, but that she was learning useful skills about customer service and inventory management. As we finished dinner, I brought up the practical aspect of moving forward. I want to be clear about how I can support each of you in healthy ways, I said. Dad, Mom, I'm happy to help review your retirement planning or connect you with financial resources, but I won't be making regular contributions beyond normal family gifts for birthdays and holidays. They nodded, Dad, with lingering reluctance but acceptance nonetheless. I turned to Amanda. For you, I'm still willing to fund constructive steps toward independence, career counseling skills, training, professional development. Not cash for expenses, but investments in your future ability to support yourself. Instead of the defensive reaction I half expected, Amanda considered the offer seriously. The store manager mentioned they offer assistant buyer training for employees who show potential. It requires some additional classes in retail merchandising that aren't covered by employee benefits. Would something like that qualify? Absolutely, I agreed, pleased by her practical thinking. Send me the information, and we can discuss the details. The evening ended without perfect resolution. Real family healing doesn't happen in a single conversation, but with tentative steps toward a healthier dynamic. As they prepared to leave, Dad lingered behind Mom and Amanda, awkwardly extending his hand to me. You've built a good life here, son, he said, gesturing to the condo. I should have said that earlier. The acknowledgement was simple but significant, the first genuine recognition of my achievements without qualification or comparison. I shook his hand, then made an impulsive decision, and pulled him into a brief hug. Thanks for coming tonight, I said as I released him. It means a lot. In the weeks that followed, our family continued the difficult work of establishing new patterns of interaction. Dad struggled the most with the changed dynamic, occasionally slipping into old habits of dismissing my choices or overly praising Amanda's minor accomplishments. However, he caught himself more often than not, sometimes mid-sentence, visibly working to adjust long-established thought patterns. Mom found a stronger voice, no longer automatically deferring to Dad's opinions or smoothing over conflicts at her own expense. She began pursuing interests she'd set aside during decades of family mediation, joining a book club, and volunteering at a community garden. These activities seemed to energize her, bringing a spark that had been missing for years. Amanda's journey wasn't linear. She quit the home decor job after 6 weeks, leading to tense conversations about responsibility and consequences. However, instead of expecting immediate rescue, she applied for unemployment benefits while actively job searching, eventually securing a position as an administrative assistant at a small art gallery. The role wasn't creative, but placed her adjacent to the art world she was interested in, with a steady paycheck and potential for growth. She did enroll in the retail merchandising classes we'd discussed, discovering an unexpected aptitude for visual presentation and product selection. For the first time, she was developing skills that could lead to sustainable employment rather than chasing vague creative dreams without practical foundation. The first holiday after our confrontation tested our new boundaries. Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' home was awkward at times, old tensions surfacing between turkey and cranberry sauce. Dad made a comment about the extravagance of my new watch, momentarily falling into the pattern of criticizing my financial choices. Instead of defending myself or withdrawing, I simply said, "This is within my budget and something I enjoy. I don't need you to approve of my purchases." The directness created a brief, uncomfortable silence, but the meal continued without escalation. Most significantly, Amanda announced over dessert that she'd be moving into a shared apartment with 2 roommates the following month. "It's not as nice as my old place," she admitted, "but I can afford it on my current salary without assistance." The pride in her voice as she made this declaration was unmistakable, perhaps the first time she'd experienced the satisfaction of genuine self-sufficiency. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the imperfect but real progress we'd made as a family. The old wounds hadn't disappeared, but they were beginning to heal through honest acknowledgement rather than festering beneath layers of denial and enabling. I no longer felt responsible for managing everyone's emotions or financial security, a freedom that allowed me to engage with my family from a place of choice rather than obligation. For the first time, I felt hopeful that we might eventually develop relationships based on mutual respect rather than dysfunctional roles assigned in childhood. The path forward remained challenging, with setbacks inevitable, but we had at least begun walking in the right direction. 6 months after the fateful dinner that transformed our family dynamic, I hosted another gathering at my condo. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different from our tense meeting half a year earlier. Sunlight streamed through the windows as my family arrived, bringing the comfortable energy of people who had weathered a storm together and emerged changed but intact. Mom brought her famous apple pie. Dad carried a grocery bag containing his marinated steaks for the grill, and Amanda arrived with her new boyfriend Marcus, a graphic designer she'd met through her gallery job. The easy conversation and relaxed postures reflected our evolving relationships, still works in progress, but grounded in greater authenticity than ever before. As we gathered around my dining table, I observed the tangible evidence of our individual and collective growth. Amanda had maintained her position at the gallery for 5 consecutive months, a record for her adult working life, and had recently been given additional responsibilities coordinating with artists for upcoming exhibitions. The small salary increase allowed her to build her first modest emergency fund, a concept she would have dismissed as unnecessary just a year ago. "We're featuring a new photographer next month," she told us. During dinner, genuine enthusiasm in her voice. The gallery owner actually asked for my input on how to arrange the exhibition space. "I've been learning so much about what makes a compelling visual presentation." Dad, who once would have vaguely praised her creative spirit without acknowledging the practical aspects of her work, asked thoughtful questions about the business side of gallery operations. "That sounds like valuable experience," he observed. "Those skills would transfer to many industries if you ever wanted to explore other options." This simple acknowledgement of Amanda as a working professional, rather than a perpetual child, represented significant evolution in his thinking. He had begun to see her capabilities rather than just her needs, a shift that benefited them both. Mom had undergone perhaps the most surprising transformation. With Amanda becoming more independent and Dad adjusting to a more balanced family dynamic, Mom found space to rediscover her own identity beyond mediator and caretaker. She had joined a community college board focusing on early childhood education, leveraging her decades of teaching experience in a leadership role. The confidence this brought extended to our family interactions, where she now expressed opinions directly, rather than filtering everything through Dad's perspective. Dad himself struggled the most with changing long-established patterns, occasionally slipping into old habits of dominating conversations or dismissing perspectives that differed from his own. However, he caught himself more quickly and made visible efforts to listen before responding, especially to me. His company had indeed implemented layoffs, but he had survived the cuts and adjusted to his reduced retirement timeline with pragmatic acceptance rather than resentment. My own growth had been equally significant. The emotional freedom that came from establishing clear boundaries allowed me to bring my authentic self to all relationships, not just family ones. I had developed a close friendship with 2 colleagues that extended beyond work spending, weekends hiking and trying new restaurants, rather than working excessive hours. My perpetual insomnia had resolved as I released the burden of financial responsibility for my sister and the constant need for paternal validation. Most significantly, I had begun dating Sarah, a children's book illustrator I met through a mutual friend. Our relationship progressed with the healthy pace and open communication that Dr. Chen had helped me recognize as essential components of sustainable connection. For the first time, I entered a romantic relationship without carrying the invisible baggage of family dysfunction, able to be present and vulnerable in ways that previously seemed impossible. As we finished our meal and moved to the living room for coffee, Dad asked for everyone's attention. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly preparing for something difficult. "I want to say something," he began, voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been doing a lot of thinking over these past months, especially after talking with a counselor myself." This revelation surprised me. Dad had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary navel-gazing. "James," he continued, looking directly at me, "I owe you an apology. Not just for what happened at the restaurant last year, but for a pattern that started long before that. I favored your sister. I dismissed your accomplishments. I tried to make you into a version of myself, instead of seeing who you actually were." He paused, gathering himself. "I'm genuinely proud of the man you've become, and I thank you for having the courage to break patterns that I should have addressed years ago." The simple thank you from my father carried more weight than any elaborate apology could have. It acknowledged not just past wrongs, but the effort required to disrupt deeply entrenched family dynamics. I found myself momentarily unable to speak, nodding my acceptance of his words while processing their significance. The afternoon continued with comfortable conversation, occasional laughter, and the natural ebb and flow of family interaction, without the underlying current of resentment and unmet expectations that had previously defined our gatherings. As everyone prepared to leave, I felt a sense of peaceful accomplishment that had nothing to do with career achievements or financial success, the satisfaction of having contributed to genuine healing rather than continued dysfunction. In the quiet after they left, I reflected on the journey of the past year and the lessons it had taught me. I understood now that standing up for myself wasn't selfish but necessary, not just for my well-being but for the health of all my relationships. The courage to establish boundaries came from recognizing my inherent worth rather than seeking external validation, particularly from those unable or unwilling to provide it. I realized that family patterns established in childhood exert powerful influence but aren't immutable. Breaking those patterns requires conscious effort, professional support, and willingness to endure temporary discomfort for long-term health. Most importantly, I learned that genuine love sometimes means challenging destructive behaviors rather than enabling them through misguided assistance. The professional success I had achieved provided financial security and personal satisfaction, but it was the emotional growth of the past year that truly transformed my life. I brought my authentic self to work relationships, set appropriate limits on my time and energy, and found greater fulfillment in balanced achievement rather than compulsive proving of my worth. My relationship with Sarah flourished as I applied these same principles of honesty and healthy boundaries. Unlike previous relationships where I had either withdrawn emotionally or overcompensated through excessive giving, I engaged as a whole person with clear understanding of both my needs and responsibilities. The foundation we built promised a future partnership based on mutual respect rather than unhealed wounds. In the quiet after they left, I reflected on the journey of the past year and the lessons it had taught me. I understood now that standing up for myself wasn't selfish, but necessary not just for my well-being, but for the health of all my relationships. The courage to establish boundaries came from recognizing my inherent worth rather than seeking external validation, particularly from those unable or unwilling to provide it. As evening settled over the city, I stood at my window watching lights illuminate the skyline. The moment at the restaurant when I finally spoke my truth. Good, then I'm done paying. Her rent had initially seemed like an ending. In reality, it marked the beginning of a different story for our entire family, one with greater authenticity and potential for genuine connection. The healing wasn't complete and never would be. Family relationships remain works in progress throughout life. But we had abandoned the destructive patterns that prevented growth, creating space for new, healthier ways of loving each other. I understood now that true freedom came not from financial success or independence from family ties, but from the courage to be authentically yourself within those relationships, to offer love without sacrificing self-respect, maintain boundaries without withdrawing connection, to acknowledge past wounds without being defined by them. This realization was the most valuable asset I possessed, worth far more than any financial investment or career achievement. It was the foundation upon which all other aspects of a meaningful life could be built. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with family? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help someone else find the courage to break unhealthy patterns in their own relationships. Don't forget to like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult situations, and share with anyone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth isn't determined by others' ability to recognize it.